Have you ever wondered how your sales performance compares against your competitors and peers? The B2B Sales Benchmark Report provides the definitive guide to what success looks like in 2021. See how you compare in terms of win rate, sales cycle, average deal value, relationships, and engagement. You can see the results and get the full report at ebster.com/B2B-sales-benchmarks. This is Sales Ops Demystified, the #1 most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales operations onto the show to deconstruct the why, what, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, the leading customer engagement platform for Salesforce. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different because we have someone here sat in the room who has experience in the role, but now has transitioned to researching about the role. So, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Anthony currently works for Forrester, who produce thought leadership in various different industries, but Anthony specializes in sales operations as he has a background in that previous to joining Forrester. So we're not going to go through the normal 8 questions because there are some trends we would like to discuss. So we have 6 of them. We're going to move through them. And hopefully this is going to be maybe less practical, but more insightful and maybe even inspirational.
Inspirational indeed, yeah.
So before we do jump into the trends, can you just give us a bit of background of your sales ops experience so we know, so we have credibility
Sure.
in the conversation?
Yeah, so I spent the last 5 years as a global head of sales operations for a global services company.
Mm-hmm.
It was a worldwide company. I was based in Dublin, managing a virtual global sales operations team. So all of the challenges that I think, when I look through some of the previous sessions that you've done with other sales operations leaders, very typical, very, sort of things I experienced myself, right? Whether it's how do I evolve a sales operations organization, how do I solve planning challenges, compensation challenges, whatever it might be. And as part of that, I came into the role from a business analytics background, and I didn't have really a huge amount of knowledge about sales operations itself. And so one of the first things I did was ask my manager for some external support. And it wasn't going to be realistic for me to be able to bring in a consulting company, to bring Anthony up to speed on the whole sales operations thing. But what was an option and Serious Decisions, which is a product line now of Forrester, reached out to me and suggested their program, which is that you subscribe to their service and you get ongoing access to their analyst team and to their research. And for me, coming into sales operations, that was really helpful because it gave me an ongoing path to kind of learn the role, learn the issues involved, and have access to people who could guide me through that process. Because as a sales operations leader, you're asked to make some big decisions that have expensive implications within an organization. And so having that was a kind of a risk management aspect to it, as well as a development aspect for me. So I did that for a number of years, worked with them. They helped us put in place a lot of the structure that we built within the organization. And then last year they asked me to come and join them. So to, step outside from the day-to-day and actually look at the sales operations function itself, right? How do we evolve that function? How do we make it more strategic? How do we make it more of a business partner to the rest of the organization? And that was something I was really interested in doing. I like writing. I love doing the research elements of it. But the other part of it is the ongoing advisory with clients. So we spend most of our time talking with clients about their sales operations challenges.
Yeah.
And that's really that's where we get most of our information that we then build into our research.
Got it. And just when you're actually doing the role, what was the approximate size of your sales ops team, the number of reps, and what were you selling?
Sure. Yeah, we were selling a range of globalization services. So everything from translation to software engineering, software testing. So basically we were helping companies take their products into international markets.
Yeah.
Primarily content, software, documentation, but into European, Asian markets. So there's always an element of translation, software engineering, and other kind of adjustments that you have to make that product viable in another market, right? We had 250 salespeople.
Yep.
And we had a sales operations team that was relatively small. It was about 4 to 5 people.
Interesting. So I've been trying to nail down like the perfect ratio of ops to reps, and I landed on approximately 25, but what we're talking about here is about 1 to 50, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not ideal. I mean, we're definitely under-resourced,
Yeah.
right? And so what that meant for me personally was that I was having to, do a lot of the tactical administrative work and try and provide some strategic leadership for sales operations and, strategic support to sales leadership as well. And it's just really difficult to move at the pace that the organization wants to move at when you don't have that type of resource.
Yeah.
So I think it's a challenge that a lot of companies face.
And now you moved, I don't want to say to the dark side.
Maybe the bright side.
The light side.
I mean, when you move into sales, that's the dark side.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So you moved out of the dark side into the light side. And we're going to sort of touch upon 6 different trends that Anthony actually identified that were the things that are pertinent in the market right now. The first one is actually quite interesting because we came close to renaming this podcast after like a month or so because it kept coming up, and that is the notion of a revenue operations team and a sales operations team. So can you explain a little bit more about what that means and why you think that's happening?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So revenue operations is really around this level of alignment, formalized alignment between typically sales operations, marketing operations, and customer success operations. Although there are different flavors out there. I think one of the things that we see when we talk with clients and we talk generally in the industry is that there's a lot of experimentation going on around the idea of how to align the different components of the revenue engine. And so in some situations, you'll see sales enablement as part of that picture. Others, it won't be. You'll see product management having a more formal role to play. Finance as well, depending on whether you've got sales operations with a connection to commercial operations, business operations. But I think at an average level, you would say sales ops, marketing ops, customer success ops. And really, I think there's a few things that are driving that. Obviously, on the external side, in terms of the customer side, the buying scenario has become a lot more complex, right? The number of people involved in these decisions, particularly in enterprise and beyond, means that trying to understand who's involved in that process, what their interactions are, what they need, their role within the buying group, and how we should interact with those is becoming a difficult thing, not just for sales, but for marketing as well. And then even on the customer success side, once you've brought in a customer, it's a different set of personas that you're dealing with, right? The people are actually, you need to adopt and use this stuff. So keeping track of all of those personas and then optimizing the entire thing together is a challenge for a lot of organizations who have kind of relied on a kind of coalition approach up until now, kind of, well, let's all hold hands and let's hope this thing comes together. And a lot of times that's dependent on the relationships at the senior level in the organization, right? So does the CMO or the CSO have a positive relationship? And sometimes they do, and things work out well, and sometimes they don't. Or somebody leaves and somebody else comes in who has a completely different vision of what sales and marketing should or shouldn't be, and things change. So that there isn't that consistency in terms of how to manage or optimize that revenue engine. Mm-hmm. And then, internally, I think organizations, particularly CEOs and boards, have maybe had enough of the lack of alignment, right? Whether you're a startup organization and you've got venture capital money that's putting pressure on everybody to deliver results, or whether you're a mature organization who maybe the growth is not what it was, you're trying to extend the product life cycles, you're trying to introduce new products, and you've got a very large and complex organization, that there's not a lot of patience for sales and marketing not getting along anymore, right? And then you add into that then the shift between perpetual to subscription business models. You throw in AI. So there's plenty of reasons as to why this type of thing needs to happen and why organizations are trying to figure out what's the best model for them. Right.
So if you took a company, let's just take Esther, for example, where there's 5 in marketing, 5 in sales, 5 in customer success. We don't really have a formal sales operations role. Would you recommend that the first ops person we hire over those teams to be someone to sit over everybody, or just to focus on sales?
Yeah, I mean, I think at an early stage of an organization, it is a good opportunity to think about revenue operations as opposed to sales operations. Finding a candidate who could do that comfortably is probably the next challenge, right? And so that may be something that's doable in terms of finding that type of mix. Today, I'm not sure that there's a huge volume of people who can comfortably sit across the two. And you know, there's a question of scale then as well, right? So typically, I think we see it happening where they've built out somewhat of a team, of a sales ops team, somewhat of a marketing ops team, and it's a question of, okay, how do we get these two, you know, really effectively working together? But yeah, at those early stages, I think it's probably unlikely that you're going to find a profile that fits, unfortunately.
Final question before we move on. Should we rename the podcast?
I think, you know, it's one where you're going to have to keep an eye on that, right? Because I think there's a lot of change happening around this. You know, our organizations are looking to make that shift. And I think in the next couple of months, you'll probably see more of a
shift to revenue
operations. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a big area of focus for us because clients are coming to us and asking us, what is the right model, right? Because CMOs are worried that I don't want to report to the CRO, right? You know, I'm a CMO. I report to the CEO. So you put somebody else in there for me. And, you know, within other organizations who are very large, there's a huge complexity in building a formalized or centralized revenue operations function. So I think you're going to see a spectrum of approaches across, you know, companies that are in different life cycle stages. So there's, you know, certainly in the analysis and research that we've done, there's a lot of different experimentation going on. Our job really is to understand what those experiments are, what the pros and cons are of those different choices, and kind of make that available to people so that they can kind of decide what makes sense for them.
Got it. Moving on to something that I also found quite interesting is what you're saying, or your point about leads versus opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, as you mentioned, so many buyer personas, should we really be focusing on leads when someone could come in, but you then have 7 more people to commit to buy? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So could you share more about that?
Yeah, so I think generally marketing and sales have been very heavily inquiry-centric, right? And we tend to, when somebody raises a hand, it's like everybody focus on this guy, right? And we just go all in on that. And we're kind of ignoring the fact that modern B2B buying is more comprehensive than that on the buyer side, right? There's more people involved. And I guess what we're trying to communicate is that the lead object in CRM systems is not the ideal object for capturing that richness, because it only captures one. It's built for one person, right? And there's an opportunity, we think, to rethink that model. And so we obviously have a demand unit model that talks about the buying unit, tracking the buying unit. How do we identify who's involved, what their interactions are? How do we provide that as a package to a salesperson so that when they look at an opportunity for marketing that has that information in terms of the multiple personas involved, their activity, it looks like a far more richer opportunity for them to go work than maybe something that's just one individual and doesn't have that kind of richness. You know, so it's really it's a considerable mental shift though as well, right? In terms of, because traditionally opportunities have been the domain of the sales organization, right? Salespeople create their own opportunities. And I guess what we're saying is it's time to maybe revisit that and think about, is there, you know, should one part of the organization own opportunity creation? Is there the opportunity, pardon the pun, to start that process earlier in the sales cycle? You know, and for some organizations, they may start it at SDRs, in terms of SDRs creating the opportunity and passing it along. Others are looking to do it much earlier in the process. So they're doing account-based marketing planning and they're identifying those kind of ideal opportunities. and creating them. And then as they go through their nurture plans and their campaigns, they're adding in the names, they're adding in the activity, and then it's working its way then through the funnel. So by the time it gets to sales, they've got something that's kind of really meaty. Right.
So bringing the opportunity creation further back through the funnel. Are you actually seeing people doing that, or you think that?
No, we're seeing people do that. Yeah, and it is a shift, right? And there's a lot of work to be done to get everybody aligned around that idea, particularly sales. Right? I think from a marketing perspective, they want to be able to deliver greater value to the sales organization, right? They want to have greater return on investment in their campaigns and their other activities. But that's where that revenue ops mindset, that alignment mindset is really required to make those type of changes happen. And in the organizations that we've worked with who have put that in place, that's kind of been the prerequisite, right? You can't do that type of stuff if you don't have that buy-in, across the functional leaders.
Agile in sales.
Yeah, so I think it's connected to revenue operations in a lot of ways. If companies decide that they want to take a centralized approach to revenue operations, then that's fine. Then you've got authority across all of the parts of the revenue engine. But when you're relying on a kind of coalition approach, you don't have a formal authority of marketing or customer success or sales, and whatever the situation might be. So what is your governance model? How do you get these groups to work together? And so I think the question that we've been looking at is Agile and in particular things like Scrum a governance model that companies can apply when they don't have formal authority, right? So how do you bring resources from sales, marketing, and customer success and product or wherever else together to solve specific challenges within your revenue engine, right? Whether it's renewals, whether it's a focus on driving new business logos, but having a model to gel everybody together and a way to do it iteratively, right? So it's because a lot of the initiatives that we see organizations driving, they last for a very long time. They're kind of these monster initiatives. They move very slowly. It's very hard to get buy-in, and they don't show results for quite a long time. And the whole concept of Agile is that you're delivering things along the way. You're showing value along the way. You're getting buy-in as you do that. And also it's about how do you empower folks in marketing and in sales ops and elsewhere to be able to have some control over this stuff, right? And that means them being able to, if they need to pull the and-on cord, right? Like at the Toyota plants, that the senior guys have to, like one of our clients, they literally have a metaphorical and-on cord. So if there's something broken in the sales cycle in the funnel, they pull it, and the CEO, CMO, the CSO have to sit down within 24 hours to resolve it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and so that type of thing, it's not easy to just flick a switch and put that type of infrastructure in place. And in some organizations, your DevOps teams, IT may already have some form of Scrum in place and Scrum expertise within the organization. And if you have that, then you're kind of at an advantage in terms of being able to think about applying that in marketing and sales. If you're doing it from scratch, you've got to invest in bringing somebody to that level who can actually instigate that within their organization. But we're definitely seeing a trend for more and more organizations looking to figure out how to apply that and get faster return.
Got it. So instead of having like rigid structures within those three areas, success, marketing, and sales, you're actually saying under a CRO, there could be dynamic groups working together to achieve things faster.
Correct, and not even under a CRO. If the company decides that they don't want to make any functional organizational design changes, so you still have a CMO, still have a CSO, still have a chief customer officer, whatever, but you want to get these teams working together tightly and effectively. That's certainly a very strong option for doing that.
Got it. Fourth trend, moving on to AI in sales.
Yeah.
So what examples are you seeing today of AI being used to improve the sales process?
So I think like the obvious first wave of AI within sales has been a productivity play, right? How do we give our salespeople back more time to sell? How do we improve the quality of the information that we get from our salespeople? And so a lot of the AI tooling and certainly ForceWave has been around taking the administration burden off the salespeople, capturing, call details, emails, contact data, and improving the quality of that information, because salespeople don't like doing it, right? Nobody wants to do that stuff within sales. So I mean, AI has largely solved that problem for the companies who can afford to do it, right? And that's probably another challenge, right? But so now that you've started to capture that data, AI is starting to do some other things. It's starting to be able to give you back and give sellers back information. So it's tracking things like, well, to our previous discussion around buying groups, who is involved in the buying group, what interactions are they having, either digitally or with salespeople, with marketing, whoever. What results are you seeing from those different types of interactions, and giving people back recommended next steps in terms of what should you be doing next in this stage of the sales process, or in this stage of the marketing funnel, or what type of content should you be sharing next that works for this particular type of buying persona. And then I think for a lot of organizations, particularly in marketing as well, they've lost a lot of their contact database through GDPR. And a lot of AI tools are able to plumb the sellers' email inboxes and other areas where they do all of their shadow pipeline, shall we say, and bring that stuff up to the surface, right? Because probably on average, a salesperson is putting about 20% of the contacts that they have into the CRM, right? And so AI is pulling that stuff out and serving it up. And so there is a bit of a trade-off within the organization that, I think companies have to think about as well, is that one play of AI is that they're getting productivity, you're taking this administration burden off them, but the trade-off is that there's a much larger increase in transparency, right? And so, for organizations have to think about culturally how they sell that within their sales organization, right?
So Evs actually have a product that kind of does this, right? And so our challenge, if we're trying to sell to a sales manager or sales operations person, if like the challenge is not selling to them, the challenge is them selling to their reps, right? And we've lost because reps have pushed back and don't want full transparency. So that's a super interesting challenge to have.
Yeah, and I think part of it is setting the expectations up early. We've seen some examples where clients have put in place systems, have not had the engagement with the sales staff, and that's they haven't been upfront about the fact that they're putting these tools in place, and with good reason, right? A company has to have transparency into in the same way as Uber has transparency into all of its drivers and what they do. A sales organization needs to have that same type of visibility, but it has to come with an understanding that it's not just there to pick one salesperson off against the other. It's for more progressive reasons, right? In terms of giving sellers recommendations, making sure they're working on the right deals, and that that their chances of moving an opportunity from one stage to the next improves as a result of this data, right? So it's serving them. I think part of the problem in the past is that a lot of these tools have been put in place, and the beneficiaries of it were really sales operations or sales leadership or executive leadership. But I think more and more AI is serving back important content to the sellers to help them move deals on. Right?
Yeah. So, I get it. So previously, AI was just serving the overlords. Now, AI is developing such that it's also serving the reps, the actual reps themselves.
Yeah.
And therefore, they would have less pushback on any of these tools because it's actually adding value to their commission check.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously there's a change management effort there that you have to consider as well, right? How do we deal with sellers' concerns? How do we pilot these type of approaches where you get to show sellers in a smaller scale environment the value of what they're getting from these tools, before you go with a big push. That would certainly be our recommendation.
Got it. Analytics in sales. Now, I assume, or what I've seen in the last 10 years is the amount of data available to somebody running a sales process is probably grown exponentially.
And it's getting worse.
Yeah, for real. And so that means we now have a problem of what do we do with all this information?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think not only is there more data, there's more ways of analyzing the data, there's more tools. Pretty much an 8-year-old can create a dashboard at this point, right? So there's no shortage of dashboards and reports anymore, right? But the challenge is, are we delivering insights? Are we really being influential in terms of what we bring to senior leadership, to executive leadership? Are we telling a story with the data? Because I think for a lot of analysts, they're relying on the data to do the hard work for them, right? And there has to be an element of translation, right? We take all this data, we get a sense of what the insights are from these, but what are we looking for in terms of action? What's the recommendation that we're looking to bring to senior leadership? What's the evidence that supports that? And it's not just enough to be a data cruncher anymore, because anybody can be a data cruncher these days. Obviously, there's complexities, right?
Yeah.
But within sales operations, a lot of the metrics are defined at this point in terms of what are the standard metrics for measuring effective performance. So creating dashboards around those is becoming less and less of a challenge. Obviously, companies still have a lot of extraneous data that they're trying to pull together and build into this stuff. But ultimately, if you're trying to influence and persuade senior leadership, you've got to have the ability to translate that stuff into action.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we see a lot of companies struggling with, right? They're trying to think of, okay, do I need to hire a data scientist? What kind of analyst profile do I need? And so I think what we're trying to encourage them is to make sure that they don't ignore that ability to translate data and insights into actions and be persuasive in front of senior leadership, right? It's almost like if you didn't have a dashboard or you didn't have reports and you were sat down with a senior executive, that you could tell them that story in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And if you can't, it's probably time to go back to the dashboard and redo it again.
Interesting. So you're saying that the skill that we now need is the more emotional ability to take this information, but then explain what we should do about it, but in a compelling way.
Yeah, exactly. Emotion is the right word, right? We're looking to elicit emotion from senior leadership, right? And sometimes that's not hard, but sometimes it is, particularly in terms of the things that within sales operations we care about, right? Things that we are looking to try and drive change within the organization. Some of it may relate to investment within sales operations itself, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And so I think a large requirement of an effective sales operations leader is their ability to influence leadership in the organization to get the budget you need for more resources, investment, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, in a related point, I guess, tech stack, prioritization of tools, the amount of tools we have now, and budget.
Yeah.
You're seeing some kind of, more tools, same amount of budget. Is that a challenge?
Yeah, I think what I see is obviously we deal with a broad range of customers, early stage, mid stage, and beyond, and they all have to pay the CRM mortgage, right? Like before you can feed the kids and dress them, you've got to pay the mortgage, and it's substantial, right? And I think for to that topic we were just talking about in terms of persuasion and getting greater investment, it's a tough one because there are an increasing set of tools now to wrap around the sales organization that are really kind of transformative, right? And you guys are part of that. But for a lot of organizations that we speak to, they're struggling to get the additional investment required to actually bring this stuff to life within their own organization. And I think that's going to be an increasing source of frustration as to how, are they getting enough value from their CRM systems? And what can they do about that? Because, every year, if you take an average organization, 250 salespeople like I had, I don't know what the average is these days, but it's probably close to $500,000, right? Every year.
So the FD is seeing the Salesforce invoice, and then is trying to justify the ROI, and then you're coming and being like,
hey, I want to do this, I'll just create something, and they're like,
yeah.
So I think that's a challenge, but I think to deal with that, companies have to really look at their technology strategy for sales operations. What are the investments that could make a significant difference, particularly in terms of seller productivity, right? That's a very obvious place to start, right? And because anytime you can give sellers more time in front of customers to go prospect, to meet, that's definitely the right thing to do. And there's very different ways to do it across the industry, but taking a hard look as to how could you drive improvements around that? How could you give them back that time? That's definitely a good place to start.
Got it. And a question I want to finish with is the question we finish every interview with is, who in the world of sales operations has given you the most knowledge? Who's been your inspiration?
Yeah, it's a pretty easy one. It's my boss. That's going to sound really cheesy, right? But
I hope he's watching.
Yeah, Dana Terrian is the practice leader for sales operations. And I say that because he was a mentor really in this role as I joined it last year, but previously as a client, right?
Yeah.
So he's somebody that kind of has guided me through this sales operations journey that I think a lot of the folks who watch this podcast are on as well. So having that person who can kind of give you an understanding of how to evolve your career in sales operations, what are the issues, what are the different perspectives on it, because as you move from one organization to another, or you move from one transition to another as an organization matures, things change, priorities change, and what worked in a previous company, what worked in a previous stage is not necessarily what's going to work this time.
Yeah.
But I think he's been really kind of a mentor for me. So that's yeah.
There we are.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The check is in the post.
So I always try to summarize with like the insights that I really thought were interesting, but there's probably too many in this one. The ones that stick to my mind there are how easy it is to like visualize data, and that's now not the problem anymore. The problem is trying to emotionally influence people with a story.
Yeah.
Having teams work within a revenue operation in an agile fashion, I think is really progressive and really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to see, maybe we will link to some of your research somewhere on the webpage.
Sure.
If we have any case studies or examples there. So that's super interesting. And the final one is the CRM mortgage and how the real challenge in getting investment for other tools if you're not able to fully utilize or prove the value. So we will link to Forrester and Anthony on LinkedIn somewhere around this video or audio. So if you do have any questions, I'm sure you can reach out and then obviously potentially work with Forrester if there's a need. But that was super insightful. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.